All right. Okay, we should be live and ready to go. Good morning to everybody. We appreciate you being here this morning. We're excited to start lesson 4. This is week 4. So we want to get started this morning with that, Startling Realization. And those of you who may not have been here, I think there's some additional books out there. It may be about all gone now, but it's Waking Up with the Pigs, and it's based upon the prodigal son, that lesson, as well as his brother, but the whole parable of the lost son. And so we've gone through, just as a recap real quickly, while some others are coming in and being seated, the distant country. We talked about the younger son heading off to the distant country and what that means to us in our lives, and that's what this class is about, is taking the lessons we can learn here and the application to us and really being open and honest with ourselves as we go along. And then he came to his senses was week 2, and we talked about that, and when, and a desperate moment was last week. So we talked more about that. So again, this week, a startling realization is kind of our focus. And again, while we're looking at this story, this parable from the Scripture that Jesus told in relation to the lost son, the big thing is looking at it through our own lenses, our own eyes, and application to us, okay, and where we might see ourselves in this picture, or at least have, and probably still do in a lot of ways, in some degrees more so than we realize. And so we're trying to pick that out as we go. So again, great group this morning, and appreciate all of you being here. I'm going to say one thing before we have a prayer, and I will ask Terry if he'll lead the prayer this morning before we get the class officially going here. But there's just real quick, I want to say one thing. Some of you may have noticed, I know a lot did, and some did not notice, I'm sure. But there is a prayer board that has been placed in the foyer by the water fountains, and Terry built that for us, did a really great job on doing that. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention so you would know exactly why that's there. Read the article. If you haven't read it this morning on the bulletin, if you read that, Terry, I haven't read it myself yet, but Terry has told me that it is totally goes through the whole process of that and the understanding of that, and probably you can already be thinking about that as to what that is. But it's a really great thing, and I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention because we certainly want to use it. We certainly want to use it. Okay. To get started, we'll start in prayer this morning. Terry, if you'll say that for us.
Great God, we are so grateful for the time to be together, and we praise you this morning and honor you for all the ways you've provided for us, but most importantly for your Son and for the sacrifice that he made to extend grace to us and to save us from ourselves. And we're so thankful that you loved us, Father, enough that even though we were the wasteful children, that we rebelled against you and we took the inheritance of our life and we ran from home, that you were patient and you were kind and you were forgiving, and that you allowed us the time to come to our senses and to return to you. And we know, Father, that when we did that and when we do that, you always welcome us with open arms. We're grateful for this story that shows us your love and your tender care for us. And we realize that at times in our life we have played both roles of the brothers, and we just ask you this morning to help us to overcome that and to forgive us of that and to cleanse us from that rebellion against you and the failure to love others the way that you love us. We ask all this in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. So again, week 4 is this morning, a startling realization. So as we proceed here, just going to make sure that we go back through this on the parable of the lost son and always get the thought process down that we're going into. So I'll read that. Now we do have 2 mic runners as usual, And Terry is one of those, and Sam is the other. So remember, if you will, for those at home, or for those on the live stream, we need to make sure that you speak in a mic. If it's more than one word answer you're giving me, I'm not going to be able to repeat it past that. So if you'll make sure that you raise your hand so that we can get that for those folks at home as well. So I'm going to read the parable of the lost son, and that's Luke 15, 11 through 32, and I'm reading it from the book for the translation that is in there. Verse 11, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had two sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf we are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me, and all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, Look, dear son, you've always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day. For your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So as we're in the process this morning of studying more in detail these ideas and thoughts that are in here in this story, we we want to talk about this idea of the startling realization. In the intro here in your lesson, have you ever had a moment of realization? When you suddenly saw what had been right in front of you for a long time. So is that, have you ever had that kind of awakening? Something that was right there, it's been there a long time, and you didn't even realize it. But then you finally saw it, So, I'm sure most of you have heard, you don't see something, it's right there in front of you. And I used to hear it all the time. If it was a snake, it would have bit you. Okay? It's right there. Can't you see it? Now, obviously, that was usually something that, I was doing, and my mom would say that to me. I couldn't find it. It just was not in my view for whatever reason. It's there. I don't see it. My grandmother used to say it to me all the time. My grandmother Britt now, all the time. And that's the reality of what we're seeing right here. He's realizing something, and it's been there the whole time, and it is really close in the sense that, it's always been right there. So, I'm sure all of us have had that similarity in our life to some degree over something, okay? I know for me, it's pretty constant, okay? I get told it's right there all the time, and I I think that maybe that's a man thing, and my daughter's shaking her head yes back there and laughing. I think it's sometimes a man thing, and I think God did that so the wife could really get on him at times and say, no, it's there. And when I say no, that shirt is not in the closet. I'm telling you, it's not there. And walks in there and says, here it is. You know, it's kind of one of those things that we do. But in all seriousness, you know, the prodigal son here came to his senses. Okay? We talked some, obviously, about that, but he came to his senses when he's sitting in that pig pen, and we talked a lot about that last week, you know, and the realization of what he was longing, and as it says here, is he's longing to fill his stomach, okay, with pig slop, and he suddenly realized it didn't have to be like that. That's the sudden realization here, the startling realization, I should say, okay? It doesn't have to be like that. You know, we go down... When we start down a road and it's the wrong, and we take the wrong path, you know, it's really difficult for us, especially the further you get down that path, it's really difficult for us to then see it doesn't have to be like this. Have you ever had that in your life? Doing things in your life, you started down a path, and you just can't figure out how to get off that path. And you come to a realization in your life, maybe at some point, hopefully, where you're able to say, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be like this. But until we reach that moment, until we reach that breaking point, you know, we talk about addiction a lot, okay, in our society. We have a lot of addiction problems in our society, as we all know. There's all types of addictions. It doesn't have to be chemical addictions. It can be physical addictions. It can be material addictions. It can be whatever you want to think about in relation to addiction. And the one thing you always hear is they got to hit rock bottom. You got to hit rock bottom. Well, that person hadn't hit rock bottom. And I think part of that, when we're talking about this, is this startling realization has to occur. That person has to get to a point with the addiction and realize it doesn't have to be like this. And I think until you realize that, and it's easy for me to say that standing up here, but in all honesty, with sin, you know, in my life, there have been multiple times where I didn't see that until all of a sudden one day when I was seeking it, and realized it's been here the whole time. It's been here the whole time. And this morning, I want you to be thinking about those things. This morning, that's what we want to identify in ourselves, young and old, because nobody is shielded from this except by God and your faith in God and your desire to do what's right. Okay? But we all can succumb, and we all have at some point in our lives, and if we're honest with each other, more than we would like. And so I really want you to think about that, whether it's a starting realization that you've had in the past, recent, or maybe it's one that you hadn't seen yet. Start looking. So, you know, as we wind up the intro here, the idea of, you know, Luke 15:17, as he's sitting in that pig pen, remember, a Jew, don't have anything to do with pigs, so that makes it even worse when you think of it in those terms, and filthy and all those things. But he's sitting in that pig pen, that slop he's been feeding the hogs, thinking about eating it, and then he says in 17, how many of my hired servants have food of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. It finally hit home. Finally hit home. So, we're going to go into our questions. Anybody got any comments about that? Anything you want to say in relation to the introduction to this lesson right now? Any ideas? Please raise your hand if you do. Okay. All right. Got one over here. Dave Sam, if you will.
It is kind of the nature of sin in that it blinds us. We can't see, what the problem is, but and that's also the nature of redemption and God looking to try to rescue us and save us too, is He puts things there. We have to look for it first, right? Sure. And when we're in the middle of the sin, we aren't looking. It's only when things start going poorly that we start to look for the solution, look at the source of the problem, look, how can we get out of this? And then God subtly places that in circumstances, situations, maybe through people that come to you, and He offers hope and offers that chance for us to get out of it.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else?
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
I was going to kind of piggyback on that a little bit.
No pun on the lesson? You're going to piggyback on it. All right, go ahead.
Having come from a family that was destroyed by addiction, alcoholism and drug addiction, and then me venturing down that road myself, surrounding yourself with people who love you for who you are and where you are in that moment, that helps you get out, and obviously a wonderful woman who was willing to hold my hand through that and bring me up out of my bottom. It's a huge deal. And when I got to that point and made the decision, hey, I'm going to break the cycle of where my family went, because I look at my babies and I don't want them to experience the same thing that I did. So surrounding yourself with people who love God mostly, and then they love you for who you are, is a huge deal. They got me where I am, and it's a big deal.
Fantastic. Appreciate that very much.
I don't want to take anything away from where we're getting it, where we emphasizing being in the pig pen, wallowing in the mud with the pigs and all. And maybe I may be overthinking a little bit, but it is a parable.
It is.
And you don't have to. It don't have to. You can live a wonderful life. You may not feel like you're in slop right now, but if you haven't responded to the gospel at some point in your life, you're in that pig pen.
That's right.
And so it's not just I don't want people to get the idea, well, you've got to be down and out before you respond, and all. But that was my comment.
I agree with you. I will say this. We have a lot of people who, and you're exactly right. We don't want people to feel like they got to be in the pig pen and all that stuff. Necessarily in regards to what we're seeing here. You don't have to be, but ultimately, if you know the truth and you haven't responded, you're in a pig pen. You gotta respond. What I mean by that is, if you understand it and you're not responding, then you're living in a pig pen. It just doesn't maybe resemble exactly what we see here or some of the other thoughts, but it's something has to wake you up. You have to realize. So with that, I think, though you're exactly right. I mean, we don't want people sitting here going, "Oh man, we just want you to think about it and really look at where you're at in your life." Yes, thank you.
To Eric's point, that's the older brother.
Correct.
The older brother, and this story is really pointing to him.
It really is, yeah.
The older brother is supposed to be the Pharisees, and
yeah,
they have a great life, and they're considered to be faithful. And even when you read, the only thing always sticks out is, well, you didn't give me a calf or a goat. And the reality is, he had given him everything. When he divided his property, he gave everybody everything. And the older brother never realizes his spiritual problem. And we know that because it's a parable that points to the fact that the Pharisees are the one that end up killing Jesus and leading that. They never get it. So, it was an addiction. It wasn't. Their life looks good from the outside, but you're still lost. And that's really a good way to look at this, is the parable of the lost son. And it's interesting that the son that ends lost is not the one we typically think of as being lost.
You're right. Right. We'll talk more about that as we go along, but that's really good points. Great discussion, and I really appreciate it. Any other discussion before we get into the questions? All right, we got another one over here. Brandon? And I love this discussion. That's what we need.
I think the interesting thing is, if we're honest we can be both brothers at different times. I think I have been both brothers at different times. You don't want to think of yourself as the well, I always never wanted to think of myself as the younger brother, because I never saw myself as the younger brother. I always saw myself as the older brother. And I never really saw that much problem with the older brother, if I'm honest. But the older I've gotten, I do see the problem with the older brother. But depending on where you're at in time, you have to see, not only is the younger brother going and spending his wealth, but every type of sin that we can do is that. It's not just, like the older brother says, taking and spending your money on prostitutes and bad living. If you use foul language, your mouth is a toilet, just like the pig pen. Okay, you have to see your sin honestly, and so you get to be the younger brother. And then sometimes I think for Christians, our biggest error is thinking we're the older brother, and we end up being in that position easily too.
Yep. Very good. Thank you for the comments. Anybody else before we go into the questions? Okay, I'm going to see if I can get somebody, if you will, to turn to 1 Kings 19. 1 Kings 19 and verse 11 through 13, and get you to read that, please. Who has that and can read that for me? 1 Kings 19. Okay, we got Jason. Go ahead.
And he said, Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah?
Okay, so as we reflect upon this scene from the prodigal son and what it looks like to be in this pig pen, as we've talked about, is there anyone around? So that's one of the first questions here. What does 1 Kings 19, what was just read, 11 through 13, what does that have to do with this discussion? What's the scene? Okay, Elijah is running for his life. All right, and he's scared. Exactly. And so he's there, and he goes out and he stands, on the mount and before the Lord, and the Lord passed by. And you get this huge wind, right? That's what we just read. Just get this really strong wind, and it says that it was great and strong, and it tore the mountains and broke in pieces rocks. So you got this visual, you got all this going on, these things that are happening, but he says the Lord wasn't in the wind. And then after that wind, there was an earthquake. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced something like that, but it wouldn't be fun to experience an earthquake, okay? It says, and what power there is in something like that. And he said, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake, okay? Then there was a fire, okay? It says, but the Lord was not in the fire. And then after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. When Elijah heard that, he wrapped his face in a cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave that he was hiding in. And the Lord spoke to him, right? What are you doing here, Elijah? So, as you think about that scene versus the scene of the son, okay, all right, is there anyone around? Is there anyone there to talk to? We can assume for the first time in a long time, talking about the son in the pig pen, he is in a moment of silence and solitude. This prodigal son, he's in this moment sitting there in solitude. And then we think about this in terms of what we just read about with Elijah. Okay? What is it, it says, or I'm sorry, what can we learn from the story with Elijah in relation to this? What can we understand from this about the way we expect to see and hear God versus the way we really see and hear God the best? Yeah, Terry.
So I don't want to draw the parallel out more because we don't see Elijah this way, but this is a very low moment in his life.
Very
but it's
low.
not because of sin.
Right.
In fact, he just finished the confrontation on Mount Carmel, and he's just cleansed Israel of 850 false prophets, put them to death according to the law.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's hiding, and it's a form of depression, really, probably, because Jezebel says she's going to hunt him down and kill him, just like he killed her prophets.
Right.
So it's not the same, except for it's a very low moment in his
That's
life,
true.
and that's where it's a parallel to the pig pen.
Correct.
Both very low moments, which tells you you can come to your senses in low moments for different reasons. It's not always sin. And I think that's one of the things to kind of see there in those parallels is it's not sin for him, but it's still this feeling of isolation and loneliness and hopelessness.
Sure.
And that's what the two of them share in common, just different paths to get there.
Good point. Very good point. So, in the expectation, we're sitting there in this stillness and this quietness, as Elijah was in the cave and with the low moment, and then this young man in a low moment, different scenario, but sitting in this pig pen, but quiet and what do we really expect? Elijah, as we read that story, all these things are going on, huge things, You got the wind, it's tearing mountains to pieces. You got an earthquake, you got a fire, you got all these things as the Lord passed by. Where do we expect, to hear God? Would you expect to hear God during turmoil? Or would you expect to hear God in the silence? Which one? Which one? We've seen God do huge things. As we read the Scripture and we see all that He's done, the miracles that's been performed in the Old Testament, all types of things, and of course Elijah himself, we just talking about
Scott, while he checks your mic, let me say something about this scene with Elijah. When the Lord comes, if you're not in good standing with the Lord, it is going to be all those chaotic events. It's going to be the earthquake and the fire and the powerful wind. But when you're with the Lord, it's a calm, soothing response, like this whisper. And I think one of the things that you see in this is when you say, well, how do you expect God to come? Well, it depends on where I'm at. Because when the Lord comes, if I'm lost, it's going to be like those powerful, awful things. But if I am in the Lord, it's going to be this calm, reassuring, peaceful.
I know where I sit. That's right.
And that's what all of the Day of the Lord passages point to in things like even Revelation, that, you know, in one sense in Revelation, we said that you saw that here's this chaos, here's this destruction, here's all these things are going to happen. But if you're with the Lord, it's actually justice and it's deliverance and it's peace and it's eternity. So what I see in that passage is, depends on where you're at and who you are.
It's true.
That's how you find God.
Okay. All right, any other comments about that? Got one over here, if you will. Bring the mic to Janie.
This is not original with me, but there are so many questions in what are you doing here, because you focus on the different words. What are you doing here? Mm-hmm. What are you doing here? Mm-hmm. What are you doing here? Or what are you doing here?
Okay.
And with Elijah, they're all fear.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
But with this man, the younger son, those are different answers.
Wow.
And what are you doing here? You're a Jew. You should be home.
All right.
What are you doing here? I'm dying. What are you doing here?
Okay.
You know, I'm lost.
Lost.
So I think that's a valid point. I wish I'd thought of it myself, but I didn't. But, and that's the question for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I doing?
Sure.
What am I doing here? What am I doing here? So I just think that's an interesting
That
thing
is
to
very
think
interesting.
about.
Very interesting. Good take. Okay. Anything else before we move on? So let's get somebody to read Psalm 46:10, please. Psalm 46:10. Who wants to read that for me? All right, go ahead, Mark. Oh, need a mic. Yep.
Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth.
Okay. All right. So, I guess as we read this, it talks about being still. And so, what is your definition of stillness, and what can it lead to? What would be your definition of stillness? Anybody? Any takers? All right, got one over here. Got one over there. Go ahead, Jason, and then Sam.
I put calmness as a definition, and it could lead to focus.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
Mine's probably not the conventional answer, but I think I struggle most with the questions that aren't explicitly answered in the Bible or, you know, anywhere about who God is and where we came from and all these things. Those are the things that I struggle with. Where we're going, you know, like the concrete answers to those. And I get caught up in that. And just trusting that it's okay that I don't know. It's probably better that I don't know. But in the end, I just trust that God, you know, that God and Jesus did what are doing what they say they're going to do, and they, you know, they keep their promises. And the evidence that I can see, that's always the answer I come back to in experiences with my own life and in nature and everything else. Everything points to God is who he says he is, and he did what he said he was going to do, and there's comfort in that, even with all the questions left unanswered, you know. So thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Go ahead, Curtis.
The question is, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It talks here about being still in verse 46:10, or stopping and being still. What is your definition of stillness, and what can it lead to?
To me, being still is you stop trying to figure it out and you just trust God. Say like you got people in your life that you want to save, and the harder you try to talk to them about it, the more they walk away from it. So you just have to realize you plant the seed and God gives the increase. Sometimes you just have to stop and let God do what he's going to do.
All right, very good. Patiently wait. Okay, very good. Very good definition. Patiently wait.
So in this psalm, he's talking to God's enemies.
Yes.
And when he tells him to be still, what he's telling them to do is stop fighting against him.
Correct.
And to me, that's what stillness is. Stop fighting against God.
You know, and I agree 100% with that, because when we're being still in the relation to this, you know, we're stopping and we're putting things in perspective and in order and putting the chaos away, because we can't fight God and win. It's not going to happen, okay? We need to stop and be still. And that's when God will speak to you more effectively. You will allow him, okay, when you stop fighting him, right? Exactly. In this. So, you know, at this point, as we're going through this idea, you know, that's part of it. You know, he's sitting in the pig pen. He reaches this point. Things are still around him. He's there. He's in the right mode to listen. He's in the right mode to understand, I got to stop fighting. When we're talking about the startling realization. Okay. So they wanted us to list a few synonyms of stillness. And Janie, I did have to look up synonyms again. I'm sorry, I forgot what it was. Anyway, how much better is your life with these words in it? So what are some synonyms that folks came up with? Anybody want to share that real quick? I'm sorry? Tranquility. Yeah, I've got that one. Yeah, good. All right, anybody else? Quiet. Okay. Serenity. Okay. Anything else? I had two more. I've got one which Jason mentioned earlier. It's calmness. And I have one too that I thought was really good, because I heard this my whole life. Hush. Okay? Hush. All right? Sometimes that was followed with a whack. But anyway, hush. That was a good one. Concentration. See, all that's tying together, in my opinion. Okay? You know, when we put these things, when we put this idea of stillness into action in our life, okay, these words that we just described, these synonyms, are in our life. We put them in action. It's good for the soul, okay? It's really good for our soul at times to do that, no matter where we're sitting in relation to what we're talking about in the pig pen. But certainly at that point, it's going to help us. But these things they're going to help us if we will just take the time and dwell in quiet with God and realize, okay, I may have some issues going on. I got to stop fighting. I got to listen to God and just spend time with Him only. Yes. Surrender. That's a really good one. Surrender. Like it. Okay. So there's our bell. We're going to move on to the next thought, and 2 Kings 5, it's 1 through 19. So I'm not going to be able to read this whole thing and us get through it, but you guys remember the story of Naaman probably. And, well, we might have, hold on just a second. So you remember the story of Naaman, and, you know, or if you do, you remember that he's high up in Syria as a warrior, and he goes to the king of Syria. He's got leprosy. Okay, Naaman does. He has leprosy, and of course we know what leprosy was like, and being shunned and all types of things. I mean, it just was awful type scenario. And of course, Syria and Israel are enemies, but he goes to the king of Syria and talks to him about a letter, and wants to go to him, wants to send this to him. And the whole reason why is because they had a servant girl that they had taken captive at some point, who saw the situation he was going through and told his wife, hey, look, if he will go to this, if he will go to this great prophet, he can be cleansed. It's a good opportunity here to do that. And so because of that, he was urged to do that. He went to the king of Syria. Finally, it was relented, and he went. But when he got there, and he was carrying goods and all these things to give and reward for being cleansed, he gets there, and his servant goes in, and or servant comes out from Elijah's house, and Elijah is or does not come out. And Elijah sends him out, tells him what to do. And what did he tell him to do to cleanse himself? Remember that? Okay, yeah. Go to the river Jordan and dip 7 times and you'll be cleansed. So he went and did that happily, right? No. Okay. So with all that said, we know that eventually he was mad. He started storming off, and his servants are talking to him, and they're like, it wasn't a really difficult thing. You need to go do it. You need to go do it. Well, he does it, and sure enough, he's cleansed. So we know that Elijah from then on is, he knows that God lives in Israel, okay? And he knows that he is the true God. So the bottom line is, in relation to this, we want to talk about verse 10, starting out specifically here. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. Does what Naaman is being asked seem like a hard thing to do? No. I mean, man, if somebody could tell you, hey, you got cancer and you could go dip in Yellow Leaf Creek down here 7 times and be cleansed, that'd be a pretty simple thing to do in comparison to what we go through in order to cleanse ourselves of diseases, especially like cancer, right? Okay. Very simple. Verse 11, what is Naaman's response to such an easy fix? Do what? He's angry. That's right, exactly. And that anger is stemmed from pride, right? It comes from that inner pride that we all carry to some degree, and he does here, because he wanted, he figured at least he'd come out. How did he envision it? He envisioned him coming out, right? And waving and doing some things or whatever, and something grand. It just was supposed to be grand, not just go dip in the Jordan 7 times, that old nasty Jordan River,
It was supposed to be an experience.
Yeah, that's what we say today. It was supposed to be an experience, exactly. Naaman is in desperate need of aha, and who is it that flips the switch for him? Okay. All right. I guess his servants helped flip the switch because they went and talked to him and just said, man, is this a difficult thing? All right. And I would also say that was his aha moment when he made that decision, But obviously Elijah and ultimately God are behind the whole thing in that sense. Yes, Dave.
I think one of the strongest points from this whole illustration is that God is pointing out to Naaman and making it quite clear to him the path to cleansing is not the yellow brick road. It ain't beautiful. It ain't pretty. And be honest with us, with each of us, it requires us to get dirtier before we are cleansed.
Really good.
To the not fun things in life that we don't want to do, to say I'm sorry, to say I have sinned and this is what I've done, to say, I want to change. All of those things are ugly and not fun, but that's really the path to cleansing. We've got to get dirtier before God cleanses us.
Good point. Really good. So we got to stop. Class is over, and we didn't get through everything. I'm sorry about that, but ultimately a really great lesson today, and I really want you to go through and reflect on this some more and think about where you're at and the whole idea of calmness and stillness, with God and the surrender that it takes, and quit fighting Him. And we all need to do that every day in our lives. I appreciate everybody. Thank you.